but it's also about serving public ends. That is a very important point. When you're a public servant, one thing that we often forget, and I'm glad that this is actually sort of a continuation from the previous expert session of Professor Dash last evening, because it's good. There's going to be a sense of continuity. When you're a public servant, irrespective of who you work for, and this is beyond translation, you should always remember you're working for the government of India or the government of West Bengal. You're not working for a UPA government or an NDA government. You're not working for a left-hand government or a Trinamool government. You're working for the government of West Bengal or the government of India. The government is a permanent entity. It is not going to take this or depending on how long we enjoy the popular support. It is often that the lines get blurred because, especially in our state, people who come to power stay in power for a prolonged period of time. And that is probably why the lines get blurred. So as a public servant, you should always remember who you work for. It is only when you are not sure of who you work for that those problems creep in and the questions of objectivity, impartiality arise. So on that note, let's start. The second slide, please.
Slide or the video?
The second slide. So to begin with, my first source of inspiration, I would like to pay a tribute to my mother, late Professor Jayashree Mr. who used to teach at Calcutta College, and my first teacher and introducer to the field of translation, whose ideas have helped me survive in this field for the last 12 to 13 years, and who has been a constant source of inspiration. And it gives me immense happiness to find in this seminar I have at least one ex-student of Calcutta College and my mother here, Partho, who's doing his PhD at Singapore University. And as you can see, my alpha, my omega, and all the letters in between. There's a specific reason why you see the Greek numerals here. A question that Dr. Pramanik asked yesterday during his session. My mother would have been one of those few handful of people who actually managed to read Plato or Aristotle in the Hellenic script. We used to have this tiny group of Hellenic scholars in Calcutta. That society is now defunct, the Indo-Greek Cultural Association, where they would actually take the pains to study Greek and translate directly from Greek to Bangla or English. So, moving on now to the Alma Mara. Let me see if you can recognize this. Thank you. So, what language did you hear that Robindra Shangi did? Any guesses? Okay, the language was German, and this is from a very well-known literary adaptation. This is Lal Pathor. If you haven't seen the film, this is the original Bengali version. There was a Hindi adaptation of it as well, with Rajkumar reprising the role that Uttam Kumar played in the original, and Vinod Mehra playing the role that you see Nirbal Kumar playing here. So Nirbal Kumar here plays an engineer who goes to Germany. A lot of our engineers then who go to Germany or Soviet Russia for work, and he was the character here is well versed in German, and therefore gives a sort of a presentation of his German skills by singing Alo Amar Alo first in Bengali Bengali, and then in German. This is actually the first instance of Rabindra Sangeet. This is the first instance. This is the first instance in Bangla cinema. I won't be able to vouch for Indian cinema, where you actually find Rabindranath being sung in a foreign language. And mind you, this is 1964. This was before Devabrata Vishwas came out with his recording of Thine is this the beginning, mine also the ending. That came out a few years later. So this was the first instance of a Rabindra Sangeet being sung in a foreign language on screen. The reason why I brought this up was tonic translations have indirectly become a part or a collateral of the kind of job that I do by accident. And we will revisit this later. Coming to the next slide. When you're in the field of translation, you might be aware of a certain day in the calendar that is designated by the United Nations as the International Translation Day. When do you think is the International Translation Day? Does anyone know when the International Translation Day is? So the answer is on your screen. The Roman Catholic Church has a patron saint for everything. Everything. Every time something new comes up, they appoint a patron saint for that. You even have a patron saint of the internet, which is Saint Isidore. Now, Saint Jerome, because he was the first one to translate the Bible into Latin directly from Hebrew, which you know as the Vulgate Bible, the Latin Vulgate Bible. He was accorded the status of the patron saint of translation by the Vatican. And it is on his day of martyrdom, which is called the Feast of a certain saint, 30th September. Don't go into the Indian connotations of the number you see there, 420 AD. 420 AD, 30th September was the day when he passed away. And the United Nations, in a resolution, declared 30th September as the International Translation Day. So when you know that, you realize that the International Translation Day is not a secular point. It has a very strong Christian element behind it. Next one. Now, this is the gentleman who Saint Jerome is actually indebted to, because in the European classical tradition, he is considered the Adi Purush of translation. Lucius Livius Andronicus, or if you say it in the Italian way, Livio Andronico, the first acknowledged gentleman translator who have translated Homer into Latin. He was the one who created that bridge between he is responsible for that hyphen between the Greco-Roman. So he was the first one to translate Homer into Latin. And the thing is, all that we have of him, all that is extant, is just 46 lines. Imagine someone translates all of Ramayana or Mahabharata and all you have are 46 lines. But it is on the basis of that, some of which is literal, but some of which is figurative, that he is considered the bridge between the Hellenic tradition and the Roman tradition. Next.
Next step, please.
Okay. Where does this person come in? This is because this happens to be my first college era hero. The only superhero I knew who is actually a translator. So, being a Zavarian, we were obviously into X-Men a lot because we could identify with the X-Men on a very superficial level. And every time you would see the Zavotsav, the organizers, the union members would all be referred to as X-Men or women. I wonder why they didn't include X-women. But Cypher is one of the mutants in the X-Men universe. Everything's a universe now. So his superpower was called omnilingualism. Omnilingualism means he had the ability to translate or decipher any language, be it a specific language or be it something as simple as the USL, the Universal Sign Language, be it even the tactile representations. When I say tactile representations, I obviously mean braille. And as you can see, written, spoken, computer, or body language. So in the near or distant future, if you're writing languages known in your CV and you mention English, Bangla, Hindi, Python, Java, C++, if they start being recognized as languages proper, then he will also decipher that. So Cypher was the first translator superhero in any comic book universe. Next. Okay, now this is the real life Cypher, the one true role model for every translator or every linguist. The one man who actually goes beyond superhero definitions. A man who gets smashed drunk and keeps sleeping till 10 o'clock in the morning, realizing that his master's exam at university starts at 10 o'clock, reaches university an hour late, happens to write an exam paper for 2.5 hours while the rest are writing for 4 hours, and still ends up coming first class first. So this is that kind of a person, Horinath Dev. He died at the age of 34, and by then he was going at an average of 1 language per year. This is just a phenomenal thing. Had someone actually not existed like this, the only way I can describe him is what the words Einstein used for Gandhi, that people who come after you would scarcely believe that a person of that kind, of that stature ever walked this earth. So it's really unbelievable that a man of such learning, and he truly is the father of all polyglots. The first Indian to be appointed the head librarian of the Imperial Library, which later became the National Library. If you ever visit the police museum between Manikola and Rajabajar, just north of the Rajabajar Science College, beyond this crossing called Shukia Street, you will find an artillery road next to the Rammohan Hall, which has been renamed after Horinath Dev. So this is the one gentleman who really is a role model for any of us who aspires to learn more languages or who aspires to be a polyglot. Next. Okay. This year, 6th December, we had the bicentenary of Max Muller. Now, for Max Muller to have been regarded the so-called father of Indology, then there needed to be a lot of midwives who ensured that he could be born as the father of Indology. And none greater than August Wilhelm Schlegel. You perhaps know his brother Friedrich Schlegel better, but August Wilhelm Schlegel has a very special place in our hearts because exactly 200 years ago, he came out with the first annotated edition of the Bhagavad Gita for the Occidental reader, with a Latin translation with annotations. But mind you, he did not translate the Gita from Sanskrit. He used the filter of English to translate the Bhagavad Gita. So now the question arises, who then did the first translation of the Bhagavad Gita? Next slide. That was done by Sir Charles Wilkins. The post that I work in, if I trace back the origins of my office, the office of the Bengali translator to the government of West Bengal, that covers the languages of English, Bangla, Hindi, Urdu, was originally known as the HMBT, His Majesty's or Her Majesty's Bengali Translator. But even prior to that, when we were under the company rule prior to the first war of independence or the Sepoy Mutiny. This was when in the pre-presidency Bengal, the Bengal administration appointed translators for specific ends. You would know that before the formal overthrow of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the state language of India was Persian. So the official business and the official hukumnama, the orders, were all brought out in Persian. So the job of a translator would be to translate from Persian to English, perhaps in this context from Persian to Bangla, and it was in 1770, 13 years after the Battle of Plassey, and this was when you formally had the gubernatorial structure in place in Bengal, where you had a Governor General of Bengal, that Charles Wilkins, born in 1749, a 21-year-old young lad who had come down here on the recommendation of Warren Hastings, became the first translator, the first salaried translator under the company administration. And they chose, and they didn't know how well they had chosen, because this was a guy who really took to Bangla like a fish takes to water. He learned the Devanagari script, he went to Benares, and one of the pioneers of the toll structure here, the toll is the Sanskrit teaching school. I stay in Hathi Bagan, and that is the region that is famous for the tolls of Hathi Bagan. Unfortunately, people don't go there for Sanskrit lessons anymore. They only go to get their kushti or tripuji done to match their kushti and tripujis for marriage. But the original purpose of the toll was teaching Sanskrit. And he decided that I have to go to the actual Pitostan, the real center of Sanskrit learning. So he went to Benares, and he found out that the top Pandit of Sanskrit from Calcutta was actually in Benares, Sri Kalinath Bhattacharya. And he went to Kalinath Bhattacharya, and he became a Gandaban Shagird. He became a full-fledged student of Kalinath Bhattacharya and learned Sanskrit for 2, 3, 4 years, well enough to be able to translate the Bhagavad Gita verse by verse in its entirety, becoming the first person to successfully translate the Bhagavad Gita in English. And it was on the basis of his translation that the French, the German, the Latin, and all the other translations in European languages of the Bhagavad Gita that happened over the course of the next 50 years took place. They were all done through the filter of Charles Wilkins' translation. And it is only when later linguists analyzed the original Sanskrit and those translations, which are like the, as we would say, Xerox copy, they realized how perfect, how satik, how nikhut Wilkins' translation was. It was through Warren Hastings' recommendation that his Bhagavad Gita was published from London, and it created such a positive uproar in London that there were pre-ordered copies. And among the prominent people to order a copy was William Blake, a pioneer pre-romantic poet. And such was the effect it had on Blake's poem. Unfortunately, he never composed a poem on it, as Keats did on reading Chapman's Homer. But what he did was, Blake, as you know, was as great an artist as a poet. And all the illustrations in Songs of Innocence and Experience are a testimony to that. What he did was paint a Banaras Ghat with those iconic black umbrellas, the big black umbrellas, and Kalinath Pundit sitting under the umbrella with his group of Brahmin scholars, and the Wilkins Saheb sitting next to them and discussing the scripture. This painting came to be known as the Brahmins, and it became an iconic painting of William Blake. Unfortunately, when people had started researching this, the original painting has not been found. It was lost to posterity. But I would request you, when you have time, to just look up his wiki pages and you will find more on these. So I will not go deeper into this, but what I should also mention is, remember, Bengal province then was inclusive of Bihar and Orissa. So when we refer to Bengal, we refer to these three together. So Patna and Cuttack and Puri were also part of the Bengal province. So his work did not restrict him to Kolkata. He also spent a year in Patna at Guru Gobind Singh's birthplace. As if you aren't aware, Guru Gobind Singh's birthplace is Patna, which is now known as the Shrine of Patna Saheb. He stayed for a year at Patna Sahib and he learned the Gurmukhi script successfully enough to translate the Japuji, which is like the what the Christians call the Vespers, the evening prayers. He translated the Japuji, which is basically comes from the word Jap, when you are chanting a certain prayer. He learned the Gurmukhi script and he translated verses of Guru Granth Sahib. Unfortunately, you are aware, if you're students of history, of the Maharaja Nanda Kumar signature forgery episode, where to some versions he was framed by Warren Hastings and there was a prolonged litigation over that. Then Warren Hastings himself was proven to be guilty and was summoned by the House of Commons for impeachment. So when as long as Warren Hastings was in Bengal, he enjoyed patronage and did his work. Be it the translation from Gurmukhi, be it the translation from Bangla, be it the translation from Sanskrit. But when Warren Hastings was summoned back to England, he lost his patronage. And so, in 1786, after spending 16 very fruitful years here, he went back to England. But the thing was, what he did there afterwards, he lived on for 50 more years, got married, had 3 daughters, became a member of the Royal Academy by virtue of his Bhagavad Gita translation. He was actually the person who started Indology and started this whole tradition of translation being a bridge between the Anglo and the Banglo. So, though part of the famous triumvirate, as they used to be called then, of James Princeton, William Jones, and Charles Wilkins, unfortunately, this is the one person whose name seems to have, as Amitabh Bachchan says in the Lagan narration, Itihas ke padno mein kahin kho gayi. So that is the kind of thing. When you think of James Princeton, you can recall the Princeton card. That has made him more. When you think of William Jones, the first thing that comes to your mind is the Asiatic Society. But when I say Charles Wilkins, it doesn't ring a bell at all. I wonder why that is so. Which is why it is my duty to make sure that you know about this person and the kind of he had no Ownership agenda. He was here for the love of language. And when he went back, he was given a professorial position in the then created India House to train the ICS, just like we have the Administrative Training Institute. In their training institute for the Indian Civil Services, he would be the India expert. He would teach them conversational language. Another thing that he did, which I will come to later because I will speak more about it in a later slide. The next slide, please. Okay. You've heard of this gentleman at least by his surname, Halhead, for the grammar book that he came out with on Bengali grammar. Mind you, this was prior to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar coming out with the primer, Varna Porichar. This was the first man who went deeper into Bengali grammar, and he came out with his version of Bengali grammar in order to make the complexities of Bengali grammar more accessible to the Sahib. Next, please. So this is the cover page of that famous book, A Grammar of the Bengali Language, Nathaniel Brassey Halhead. Now the reason why Wilkins has a special mention, had there not been Charles Wilkins, this wouldn't have been published at all. Because two other things that Wilkins should be given credit for is while he was in the United Provinces, while he was in UP, what he also did was he deciphered what was then still a mystery for a lot of people. There was this rock, the ancient rock of Bareilly, a rock that was found in Bareilly with inscriptions which, after he was able to successfully decipher, came to be known as the Kutil Lipi. If you're into linguistics, I won't go deeper into it because that is not my area of expertise. It was through his deciphering of the Kutil Lipi that the so-called puzzle of how the Devanagari evolved into the script that became Bangla and Ohomia came out. The Kutil Lipi is a very important document in order to understand the evolution of the Devanagari script into the script that is today Bangla or Ohomia. It was he, an outsider, a person who learned this language as a vocation at an adult age, that came to decipher the Kutil Lipi, and when printing technology was introduced here, he was the first man to come out with a Bengali font. It was he who established the printing press. These things are now coming to light and new researches are being done on this. There is a fascinating article by the Professor Abhijit Gupta of Jalapur University on the School Book Society, on how the school book, how a regulatory authority of the school books was brought about in early 19th century after the Hindu college was established in order to create a curriculum of study. And that is where you would find a peripheral mention of how prior to William Carey and the Srirampur Vision, it was Wilkins who came out with the first Bengali font, and the book that you see here, printed in Hooghly, was actually printed and published by Charles Wilkins himself. And it was from him that the tradition was carried forward by William Carey, and then you have the Mongol Shamachar Matthew, the Gospel of St. Matthew, that was translated in Bangla and became the first book to be published from the Srirampur Vision. Next. So now that I mentioned William Carey, this is William Carey's son Felix Carey. Now the office that I work in was constituted exclusively for him. It sounds weird now, but this entire post of the Bengali translator, when Wilkins was working, he was just a translator. There wasn't an official designation. He enjoyed the patronage of the Governor General, and when the Governor General was called back, so was he. So this is what we call in Latin coterminus. You have a coterminus post means portar ichchai korbo. As long as the master wants you to work, you work. When the master's job is finished, your work is done. So William Carey was very worried about his son when Felix Carey started spending more time in Calcutta. The place that I mentioned Borkala because Dr. Pramanik has done some pioneering work on the Borkala books. The place names are euphemisms. When you have the name of a place that is so-called by the noun, you don't directly use it by name and use euphemisms for other euphemisms. For example, many of my colleagues twitch their eyebrows the moment I say Shonagachi. That is because you all know it's the largest red light area in Bengal. And this is so-called I should say, I think it's a hypocrisy on our part because there is no way you can acknowledge the presence of an area, but you pretend that it doesn't exist. So, coming back to Shonagachi, the adjoining area, which used to be referred to as Rambagan in the times of the Bengal Renaissance. And when you say someone Rambagan Gachi, you know for certain that he's gone to the red light district. So what happened was Felix Carey started spending a lot of time in Rambagan. And mind you, William Carey was a priest by vocation, and Felix Carey was supposed to be ordained as a priest. So he was very worried and he approached the administration, which is basically like, my son is going Wakate, my son is going Uchanno, and you need to reform him. I cannot reform him. Please do something that can help me reform him. Make him do something. Something to keep him cemented within my domain, within my CCTV area. So what they did was they created a post of the Bengali translator. This was circa 1818, 1819. And Felix Phiri became a salaried translator of the administration of Bengal. We didn't have the writers' buildings or things like that then. He was operating from Srirampur mission itself, but he was entrusted with translation work, and he was as good in Bangla as he was in the Burmese language. So he used to translate not just from Persian to English, he used to translate from English to Bangla and vice versa, and also from Burmese. In fact, when we trace back to our archival section, after we shifted from the writers' building to Novarno, the state archives, which incidentally have a very Persian origin name, the official term for our state archives is Muhafiz Khana. Muhafiz is something that is kept in hifazat, and someone who can keep hifazat is a hafiz. That is how the concept of the hafiz in the Islamic tradition came. When there was fear of being exterminated and the word of God, the Quran Sharif, being lost to posterity, people started memorizing it para by para, surah by surah. And a person who had the entire Quran Sharif rote by rote was a hafiz. So to keep something in hifazat is to keep muhafiz. As you would know from that adaptation of the Anita Desai novel In Custody, the film version was called Muhafiz. So our archive is the Muhafiz Khana. After we shifted from writers' buildings, the Muhafiz Khana had to be broken up because we couldn't find enough space to accommodate the entire archival collection. So it was broken up. You people would be familiar with this parallel artery lane called the Bhavani Bhakto lane, which is right next to the Presidency College. So the same building where the College Service Commission office used to be earlier, that is now our state archives. The state archives have been broken up in a pre-independence and post-independence manner, and barring the documents related to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, which were then classified and are gradually being declassified, which I also happen to work on as part of my stint with the State Police Museum. The post-independence filtered documents are kept in our premises on the Shakespeare Shorody, the theatre room near Kalabandir. And the pre-independence archives are all here. And since you're in this vicinity, let me just mention another very exciting place to look up archival documents for. If you're looking at the municipal archives, most of you will not be aware that our state central library is at Kapurgachi, between Uldodanga and Kapurgachi on the CIT road. That is where the West Bengal government's Directorate of Library Services State Central Library is. And the Kolkata Municipal Metropolitan Library, it's known as the Kolkata Metropolitan Library, that's on the Mayfair Road, where the modern high school and the ice skating rink are, just opposite that. So that is the manual as well as the digital repository for all the municipal archives. Now, among the municipal archives, the ones which have special research value related to specific people. For example, the municipal archives pertaining to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose when he was the CEO of the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, or the documents related to Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das when he was the mayor of Calcutta in the 1920s, are all kept in the library that is right behind the Mahajati Shadam, which is a walking distance from here. So the Gronthagar and the Shamro Shala, the archives and the library there, house the municipal archives pertaining to these two gentlemen. And occasionally, a part of my office job is to have these in translation available to be uploaded on the departmental website. When the Home Department was formally formed in 1843, the office of the translator, Felix Terry, mind you, died in 1822. He died young of cholera. And the office was already in existence for 25 years. So it was, the Home Department absorbed the office of the translator, and since then till today, the office is still under the administrative control of the Home Department. During Bidhan Chandra Roy's time as Chief Minister, this is post-independence, it was in 1961 that the West Bengal Languages Act was passed in the West Bengal Legislative Assembly, where Bangla and English were deemed the languages of communication. The West Bengal Languages Act 1961. And it was then that it was felt that the scope of translation will be getting larger, wider, and for dissemination of information regarding government policies, there would be required as a segment that will be independent of the police administration. So prior to that, we didn't have an information and cultural affairs department. All the matter that you see today, of course, today when you see the information and cultural affairs department, you see it as the organ that regulates everything related to culture. That would be organizing film festivals, music festivals, theatre festivals, to regulating the Directorate of Archaeology involved with the Museums of Archaeology, or the Music Academy, the Jatra Academy, and all the media publicity that is done. Basically, the Information and Cultural Affairs Department and the translators working under them happen to be the state propaganda machinery. We tend to use propaganda as a negative term nowadays, but here I should remind you when I use that word, I'm using propaganda in a very morally neutral sense. I'm using it specifically in its lexical connotation. So, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry is the propaganda machinery for the government of India, and they bring out the advertisements in the public domain under the DAVP, the Directorate of Audio Visual Publicity, DAVP. That is the propaganda machinery for the government of India, and all the dissemination of information directly for the media is undertaken by the PIB, Press Information Bureau. So these fall under the regulations of the I and B ministry, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Similarly, at the state level, you have the translators working for the Information and Cultural Affairs Department, who are responsible for bringing out in as many languages, state languages as possible, the state organ which is called West Bengal. So, as you can see, this is the Urdu language version of the state, the official state journal West Bengal, Maghribi Bengal, Khususi Shumara. Khususi Shumara meaning special issue. So this is the official journal of the state of the government of West Bengal. The Bangla and English are well known, but perhaps it is not as well publicized in the other languages. This might look like Bangla from the distance, but this is the Santhali version. In fact, I was asking Dr. Pramanik yesterday, what script do you offer your Santhali course in? Because unfortunately, in the government domain, because the Saraswati Press does not have the original font, all the publications of Santhali are unfortunately in the Bangla script. So this is the Santhali edition of our official state organ, Paschim Bangla, which is brought up in Santhali but not in the original script, in the Bengali script. And another marquee job that we have to do once in 5 years, but which is very well publicized, is this is something you are familiar with. I either swear in the name of God or solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India as by law established, that I will uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India, that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge my duties as a Deputy Minister for the state of West Bengal, and that I will do right to all manner of people in accordance with the Constitution and the law without fear or favor, affection or envy. This is the standard pro forma for the oath of office and the oath of secrecy. This is how it is done, both at the center and the state.